A lady in distress and a singular problem. It is with a certain sense of both duty and nostalgia that I now take up my pen to set down the particulars of a case which, for reasons that will become apparent, has long been omitted from my published accounts of the activities of my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Residing within my old dispatch box, the notes upon the affair of the Ferrers documents have lain dormant for many years, their contents being of so delicate and potentially scandalous a nature that their revelation at the time would have shaken one of the most respected houses in the county of Kent to its very foundations. Now, however, with the principal actors long since passed from this world, and the title itself having devolved upon a distant cousin, I feel that no harm can come from bringing to light one of the most perplexing and intricate problems that it was ever my privilege to share with the greatest detective of our age. The matter began, as so many did, on a dreary November afternoon. A thick, greasy yellow fog swirled down Baker Street, clinging to the window panes of our lodgings and rendering the world outside a mere ghostly procession of shrouded lamps and lumbering phantoms. The gloom of the day had permeated our sitting room, and even Holmes, a man for whom the murky and the bizarre were as the very air he breathed, had succumbed to a fit of profound lethargy. He lay curled upon the sofa, a long-stemmed cherrywood pipe dangling from his lips, his eyes closed, and his pale, thin fingers interlaced across a crimson dressing gown. To all outward appearances he was asleep, but I, who knew his habits so well, was aware that his mind was far from restful. It was in such periods of enforced idleness that his active brain would prey upon itself, and I dreaded the moment when he would reach for the little Morocco case and the hypodermic syringe that offered his only escape from the drab routine of existence. "A truly abysmal day, Watson," he remarked, without opening his eyes. "The criminal classes of London appear to have taken a collective holiday. Not a single mystery of note in the morning papers, not a whisper from Gregson or Lestrade. The world is intolerably dull." "Perhaps it is for the best, Holmes," I replied, looking up from my medical journal. "A little peace can do no harm." He emitted a groan of dissent. "Peace, Watson, is for the retired grocer, not for the consulting detective. My mind is a racing engine that is tearing itself to pieces for want of the work for which it was built. I crave data, problems, intricacies. Without them, I am lost." As if in answer to his plea, there came a sudden sharp ringing of the doorbell from below. Holmes sat bolt upright, his languor vanishing as if by magic. A flicker of his old fire returned to his keen grey eyes. "Ah, a client, Watson, or I am much mistaken. I wonder what the fog has brought to our door. A lost jewel, a family secret, a matter of life and death. Let us hope for the latter. Run down and show the visitor up, there's a good fellow." Before I could rise, however, the familiar tread of Mrs. Hudson was heard upon the stair, followed by a lighter, more hesitant footfall. A moment later, our landlady ushered into the room a young lady, so cloaked and veiled that her features were entirely obscured. "A Miss Ferrers to see you, Mr. Holmes," announced Mrs. Hudson before discreetly withdrawing. Our visitor stood motionless for a moment by the door, her posture betraying a mixture of nervousness and resolution. Then, with a swift movement, she cast back her veil, revealing a face that was both handsome and deeply troubled. She was a woman of perhaps 25, with large, expressive blue eyes, a complexion that spoke of a country life, and a mouth that, though set with determination, trembled at the corners. It was a face that bespoke breeding and sensitivity, but which was at present clouded by some profound anxiety. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" she asked, her voice clear but strained. My friend bowed with a grace that was all his own. "At your service, madam. This is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson, in whom you may confide as freely as you do in me. Pray take the armchair by the fire. You have been chilled to the bone, I perceive." "You are very kind," she murmured, sinking into the chair he had indicated. She stretched her gloved hands towards the glowing coals, and I saw a tremor run through her frame. "You have come to us from the country this morning," said Holmes, resuming his position on the sofa, his eyes now alert and intensely observant. "From Kent, I believe, and your journey to us has not been a direct one. You first visited a solicitor in the vicinity of Lincoln's Inn Fields." Our client gave a violent start, her blue eyes widening in astonishment. "Sir, how could you possibly know that?" Holmes smiled faintly. "The observant man can often deduce a great deal from what others overlook. Upon the toe of your left boot, which you are at present holding out to the fire, there's a small splash of reddish-brown mud. It is a clay of a most particular type, quite distinct from the black loam of the Kentish countryside. Such a soil is found, to my certain knowledge, only in a small area of London, currently undergoing excavation for the laying of new gas mains. That area happens to be directly adjacent to the legal quarter. Furthermore, I observed upon your cloak the faintest trace of what I take to be dried ink, a minute spatter, such as might occur when a clerk hastily sands a freshly signed document. Your hansom, which I heard pull up, was labouring, indicating a long journey. The combination of facts is suggestive, is it not?" "It is astounding," she breathed. "It is precisely as you say. My name is Eleanor Ferrers. I have come from Chilham, in Kent, and I have just had a most unsatisfactory interview with my family's solicitor, Mr. Abrahams, of Abrahams and Son." "And what is the nature of the problem that has driven a young lady of your standing to seek out the assistance of a consulting detective on such a dreadful day?" Holmes inquired, his voice softening with a professional sympathy that I had seen him employ to great effect. Miss Ferrers clasped her hands together in her lap, her composure threatening to desert her. "It concerns the death of my grandfather, Lord Bevington Ferrers. He passed away peacefully in his sleep 1 month ago at the age of 81. It was not unexpected, but his death has thrown our family into a state of the most dreadful uncertainty and suspicion." "Pray continue, Miss Ferrers. We are all attention." "My grandfather," she went on, "was a man of particular habits. He was a great historian and archivist, and our home, Ferrers Court, is filled with ancient documents and manuscripts. For the last 20 years of his life, his most prized possessions were a set of papers he referred to simply as the Ferrers documents. He kept them in a small locked rosewood box within the great safe in his study. He spoke of them seldom, but when he did, it was with an air of immense gravity. He once told me that they contained the true history of the Ferrers' honour, and that their contents must never be made public unless a grave injustice was threatened." "A cryptic statement," Holmes remarked, leaning forward. "And now?" "And now they are gone," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "After my grandfather's funeral, my uncle, Robert Ferrers, the new Lord Ferrers, and the solicitor, Mr. Abrahams, went to open the safe to read the will. The rosewood box was there, Mr. Holmes, but it was empty. The documents have vanished. Holmes brought the tips of his fingers together, assuming his most professorial attitude. This is indeed a singular problem. Tell me, Miss Ferrers, what is believed to be the nature of these documents? A faint blush coloured her cheeks. This is the heart of the matter, sir. It has always been a whispered rumour in the family, a story dismissed by my uncle as fanciful nonsense, that the documents contained proof that the line of succession was not as it appeared. The story goes that my great-grandfather had an elder son, born out of wedlock, who was later legitimised in secret. If this were true, then that son's line, not my grandfather's, would hold the rightful claim to the title and the estate. I myself have a younger brother, Arthur, but the entailment is to the male line. The current heir, after my uncle, is a distant cousin. The documents, it was said, held the proof of this secret legitimization. "I see," said Holmes, his eyes gleaming with interest. "And so the disappearance of these papers is of paramount importance to your uncle, the new Lord Ferrers." "One would think so," she replied bitterly. "But his reaction has been most peculiar. He has forbidden any mention of the matter. He insists the documents were worthless trifles, genealogical notes that my grandfather, in a fit of senility, destroyed himself. He refuses to countenance a search. He will not inform the police, and he has warned both myself and my brother that if we pursue the matter, he will see us cut off from our inheritance. It is his stony indifference, his sheer refusal to investigate, that has alarmed me more than anything. It is as if he is relieved that they are gone." "Most suggestive," murmured Holmes. "And the solicitor, Mr. Abrahams? What is his position?" "He is equally unhelpful. He wrung his hands and spoke of the sanctity of a client's wishes, suggesting that the old lord must have had his reasons. He was polite, but utterly dismissive. It was his lack of curiosity that drove me here. A lawyer, Mr. Holmes, who is not curious about a missing document vital to a peerage. It seems unnatural." "It is more than unnatural, it is a contradiction in terms," said Holmes, rising to his feet and beginning to pace the room. "We have a set of documents of immense potential value which vanish at the precise moment of their owner's death. The new beneficiary of the estate displays not alarm, but relief. The family lawyer, whose duty it is to secure the estate, is complicit in this silence. The affair has a most pungent aroma, Watson. Tell me, Miss Ferrers, who had access to the study and the safe?" "Only my grandfather. He was a very secretive man. He kept the key to the safe on a chain around his neck, and it was found there after his death. The key to the rosewood box he kept hidden in a secret compartment of his desk, a place known only to him and, as it transpired, to his valet, a man named Jennings, who has served the family for 40 years. And what of this Jennings? He is beyond reproach. A more loyal and devoted servant could not be imagined. He is as bewildered as I am. He confirms that my grandfather looked at the documents only a week before he died and returned them safely to the box. So, between that time and the opening of the safe after the funeral, someone somehow opened a locked safe, unlocked an interior box, removed the papers, and left both boxes locked as they were found. They must have had access to both keys. Is that correct?" "It seems impossible, Mr. Holmes, but yes." Holmes stood before the fire, his tall, gaunt figure silhouetted against the flames. "The problem presents certain points of interest. It is a three-pipe problem, I perceive, and I shall have to give it my most profound consideration. You have done wisely to come to me, Miss Ferrers. The silence of your uncle and the solicitor is the true mystery here. It is what they are concealing, not what has been stolen, that we must uncover. Watson and I shall be pleased to travel down to Kent tomorrow morning and look into the matter upon the ground. For now, I would ask you to return home and say nothing of your visit to me. Observe your uncle, observe Jennings, observe everyone. In the quiet observation of the commonplace, the most extraordinary truths are often revealed. With a renewed sense of hope, our client thanked him profusely and took her leave. As the sound of her cab faded into the muffled roar of London, Holmes turned to me, his face animated with the thrill of the chase. "Well, Watson, what do you make of it?" "It seems a straightforward case of theft," I ventured. "The uncle, Robert, has the most to gain. He has clearly found a way to access the keys, stolen the documents that would disinherit him, and is now feigning indifference to throw off suspicion." "It is a plausible theory, Watson, and for that reason I am inclined to distrust it," he replied, reaching for his violin. "The world is full of obvious things which nobody by any chance ever observes. Robert Ferrers' behaviour is too obvious, too perfectly calculated to suggest guilt. It is the behaviour of a man who wants to be suspected of a simple theft. No, there is a deeper game being played at Ferrers' court. The solicitor's involvement, the grandfather's cryptic words, the convenient disappearance, it all points to something more subtle than mere inheritance fraud. Something older, and, I suspect, something far darker." He tucked the violin under his chin, and for the next hour the room was filled with the strange, melancholic improvisations that were his invariable accompaniment to deep thought. As I sat and listened, I knew that we were on the brink of a strange and intricate adventure, the tendrils of which reached far back into the hidden history of an old and noble family. The Secrets of Ferrers Court. The following morning saw us speeding through the Kentish countryside on an early train from Charing Cross. The fog of the previous day had given way to a crisp, clear winter sky, and the frost-covered fields glittered in the pale sunlight. Holmes was in high spirits, having spent the better part of the night poring over a formidable collection of county histories and genealogical charts which he had unearthed from his voluminous library. "The Ferrer family is an ancient one, Watson," he remarked, tapping a long finger upon the leather-bound tome in his lap. "They have held the same lands since the 15th century. A family of soldiers and statesmen for the most part. Solid, respectable, and entirely uninteresting on the surface. But every old family has its shadows. It is our business to bring them into the light." Upon arriving at the small station of Chilham, we found a trap waiting for us, sent by Miss Ferrers as arranged by telegram. The drive to Ferrers Court took us through winding lanes and past sleepy, timber-framed cottages. The house itself came upon us suddenly at a turn in the road, a magnificent, rambling edifice of mellowed red brick and grey stone, part Tudor, part Jacobean, with a host of gables and chimneys standing stark against the winter sky. It was a place that spoke of centuries of history, of pride, and of secrets. We were shown into a vast oak-panelled hall where a great log fire blazed in a cavernous hearth. Miss Ferrers came forward to greet us, her face pale but composed. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I'm so glad you could come. My uncle is away for the day on estate business, which will give us the opportunity to examine my grandfather's study without interruption." "An excellent arrangement," said Holmes, his keen eyes darting about, taking in every detail of the hall, from the portraits of grim-faced ancestors to the polished suits of armour that stood like silent sentinels in the shadows. "I should like, if I may, to speak first with the valet, Jennings." The man was summoned, a venerable figure with a deeply lined face and a stoop that spoke of a lifetime of service. He was clearly devoted to the memory of his late master, and his distress at the turn of events was palpable. Holmes treated him with a gentle courtesy that quickly won his confidence. "I understand, Jennings, that you were one of the few people who knew the location of the key to the rosewood box." "That is so, sir," the old man replied, his voice quavering slightly. "His lordship showed me years ago. If anything should happen to me suddenly, Jennings," he said, "you will know where to find it. It was in a false-bottom drawer in his desk, behind a sliding panel." "And you have told no one else of this hiding place?" "Never, sir, not a soul. It was a sacred trust." "Tell me about the documents themselves. Did you ever see them?" "Only the outside, sir. A bundle of old papers, tied with a faded green ribbon. They were written in a very old-fashioned hand, on vellum, I believe. His lordship handled them as if they were holy relics." "And you are certain he returned them to the box the week before his death?" "Absolutely, sir. I was in the room, dusting. He took them out, sat with them for a good hour, his face very grave, and then I saw him lock them back in the rosewood box and place it in the safe. He seemed troubled, sir. More so than usual." "Troubled in what way?" "He was muttering to himself, sir. I heard him say, 'The sins of the fathers. Must it fall upon the innocent?' And then, 'Perhaps the time has come for the truth to be known.'" Holmes and I exchanged a significant glance. "Thank you, Jennings. You have been most helpful," he said, dismissing the valet. "The sins of the fathers, Watson," he murmured as we followed Miss Ferrers up the grand staircase. "The plot thickens. This is no mere matter of an inheritance claim." The late Lord Ferrers' study was a magnificent room, lined from floor to ceiling with leather-bound books. A vast mahogany desk stood before a mullioned window that looked out over the formal gardens, now bleak and skeletal in the winter light. In one corner stood the object of our quest, a formidable iron safe, black and impassive. Holmes walked directly to it and examined it with the aid of his pocket lens. "A Hobbs and Comer lock," he observed, "a strong box of the first order, not easily picked. And yet there are no scratches, no signs of force. Whoever opened this did so with the key." He then turned his attention to the room itself, his eyes roving over every surface. He scrutinized the carpet, tapped upon the panelling, and ran his finger along the bookshelves. "Miss Ferrers," he said at length, "your grandfather kept the key to this safe on his person at all times, did he not?" "Always, Mr. Holmes. On a chain around his neck. It never left him." "And after his death?" "The doctor removed it in the presence of my uncle and myself. My uncle took possession of it until Mr. Abrahams arrived from London for the reading of the will." "So your uncle had the key in his sole possession for at least a day," Holmes mused. "And the key to the inner box? Its location was known only to your grandfather and to Jennings?" "That is what we believed," she confirmed. Holmes stood by the desk, lost in thought. There is a third possibility. Someone may have discovered the secret of the hidden drawer. Or, alternatively, a duplicate key may have been made for one or both locks. He turned to Miss Ferrers. I should be most grateful if you would allow me to examine the contents of your grandfather's desk. For the next hour, Holmes conducted a search of the most meticulous and exhaustive nature. Every drawer was emptied, every book was shaken, every bundle of letters was untied and its contents scrutinized. I assisted him, though I confess my own search was clumsy and unproductive compared to his methodical and purposeful investigation. It was he who finally found something of interest. From a small locked diary, dated some 50 years previously, he extracted a single, folded sheet of paper. It was a letter, the ink faded to a rusty brown, the handwriting spidery and agitated. "Listen to this, Watson," he said, his voice tense with excitement. "My dearest Bevington," it reads, "what you have told me fills me with a horror I cannot express. That an innocent man should suffer for a crime he did not commit is an abomination. I know you were but a youth, led astray by a blackguard, but your silence makes you complicit. For the sake of your own soul, you must confess the truth. The burden of this secret will poison your life and the honor of your name, which you hold so dear. Your conscience will be your true punishment. Yours in despair, Alistair." "Good heavens, Holmes!" I exclaimed. "What does it mean?" "It means, my dear fellow, that our initial theory is entirely incorrect. We are not dealing with a matter of inheritance, but with a crime. A 50-year-old crime. The sins of the fathers. The true history of the Ferrers' honor. It all begins to fall into place. The Ferrers' documents were not a proof of legitimacy, but a confession." Miss Ferrers had turned deathly pale. "A confession? My grandfather?" "It would appear so, madam. A youthful indiscretion, perhaps, that led to a terrible injustice. He preserved the evidence of it, a testament to a guilty conscience. Now, the question becomes, who would have a greater interest in destroying such a confession than the man who inherits the title that it taints?" "My uncle," she whispered. "Precisely. But the mystery of how he gained access remains. There is a piece of this puzzle that we are missing." He fell silent, his brow furrowed in concentration. Suddenly, his eyes lit upon a small silver-framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It showed two young men in the fashion of the 1840s, stiff and formal, standing side by side. "Who are these men, Miss Ferrers?" he asked sharply. "That is my grandfather Bevington on the right, and his closest friend Alistair Finch on the left. Mr. Finch was the son of a local solicitor. They were inseparable in their youth, but they had a terrible falling out. My grandfather never spoke his name again. Mr. Finch moved to London, and I believe his family fell on hard times." "Alistair Finch," Holmes repeated slowly. "The author of the letter, and a solicitor's son. Interesting." He replaced the photograph and resumed his pacing. "We have established the motive, and we have a prime suspect. But the means are still obscure. I must return to London at once. There are certain lines of inquiry that can only be pursued there. I must delve into the court records of half a century ago. Watson, you will remain here. Be my eyes and ears at Ferrers Court. I want you to observe the new Lord Ferrers upon his return. Note his every word, his every action. And above all, watch the solicitor, Mr. Abrahams, should he make an appearance. There is a deep current moving beneath the surface of this family, and I have a fancy that we have only begun to chart its depths." With that, he was gone, leaving me with a profound sense of responsibility and a growing conviction that the quiet country estate of Ferrers Court was the setting for a drama of guilt and retribution that was far from reaching its final act. A thread from the past. My vigil at Ferrers Court proved to be as unnerving as it was uneventful. Lord Robert Ferrers returned in the late afternoon, a tall, imposing man with a cold, aristocratic face and eyes that seemed to hold a perpetual disappointment with the world. He acknowledged my presence with a curt nod, accepting his niece's explanation that I was an old friend of her father's, recuperating from an illness in the country air without comment or curiosity. His indifference was, as his niece had described, absolute. He seemed hermetically sealed within his own thoughts, and his conversation at dinner was restricted to monosyllabic observations on agricultural matters. I watched him closely, but his face was a mask, betraying nothing. It was this very lack of readable emotion that I found most sinister. The following day brought a letter from Holmes delivered by the Morning Post. It was brief and to the point. "My dear Watson, the archives have yielded fruit. In the autumn of 1842, a young farmer named Thomas Slade was tried and convicted at the Kent Assizes for the manslaughter of a gamekeeper. The case against him rested primarily on the testimony of two witnesses: a young Bevington Ferrers and his companion, one Richard Croft, the son of a notoriously dissolute baronet. Slade was transported for life and died in Australia a few years later. He protested his innocence to the end. I can find no mention of Alistair Finch in the trial records, but I have discovered that his father's legal practice was ruined shortly thereafter, following a disastrous investment. The firm was eventually bought out by a young clerk. The name of that clerk was Abrahams. I am now pursuing a second line of enquiry concerning Richard Croft, who appears to have vanished from society shortly after the trial. The scent is growing warmer, Watson. Continue your observations. Yours, S.H. The letter sent a thrill of anticipation through me. The name Abrahams was the link we had been missing, a thread that connected the present with that distant crime. The family solicitor was not merely a passive observer in this drama. He was intrinsically woven into its very fabric. But how? Was he a blackmailer, or was his role something more complex? My thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of the man himself. A carriage crunched on the gravel drive, and a few moments later Mr. Abrahams was shown into the morning room. He was a small, neat man, dressed in sober black, with a pale, clean-shaven face and eyes that were perpetually downcast. He had come, he announced, to discuss some final details of the probate with Lord Ferrers. I watched him as he spoke to Miss Ferrers, his manner a perfect blend of professional sympathy and deference. He was smooth, precise, and utterly unreadable. Yet, remembering Holmes's instructions, I observed him with the keenest attention. And I saw something. It was a tiny detail, but one that struck me as significant. As he spoke of the late Lord, he repeatedly made a small, unconscious gesture, polishing the lens of his pince-nez with a silk handkerchief. But his eyes, when he thought no one was looking, darted around the room, quick and sharp as a ferret's, taking in every detail. It was the gaze of a man who was not merely visiting a house, but assessing it. His meeting with Lord Ferrers was brief and conducted behind the closed doors of the study. When he emerged, his composure was as immaculate as ever. He was taking his leave when a sudden commotion from the servants' quarters distracted us. A housemaid had fallen into a fit of hysterics. Miss Ferrers hurried away to attend to the matter, and I was left alone with the solicitor for a moment in the great hall. "A sad business, this," I remarked, by way of making conversation. "The loss of the old lord, I mean." "Indeed, Doctor," he replied, his voice a dry rustle. "A great man. He will be sorely missed." "And this business of the missing papers," I continued, probing gently. "Most peculiar." For the first time a flicker of some emotion crossed his face. It was not alarm, nor was it curiosity. It was, I thought, a look of profound, almost contemptuous weariness. "Childish nonsense, Doctor," he said, his voice dropping. "The fancies of an old man. Lord Ferrers is quite right to let the matter rest. Some family histories are best left unwritten." Before I could press him further, he had bowed and taken his leave. I stood for a long time, pondering his words. Some family histories are best left unwritten. It was a sentiment that echoed the grandfather's guilt and the uncle's furtive relief. Abraham's was a part of the conspiracy of silence. That evening, as I was preparing for bed, a new and terrible development shattered the tense quiet of the house. A cry rang out from the servants' wing, followed by frantic shouting. I seized my medical bag and hurried towards the sound. In a small, austere room, I found the source of the commotion. The old valet Jennings lay upon his bed, his face contorted and blue, gasping for breath. The local doctor had already been summoned, but it was clear to me from the first glance that nothing could be done. The man was in the final throes of what appeared to be a massive cardiac seizure. He died within minutes of my arrival. The local practitioner, a bluff countryman named Dr. Armitage, confirmed my diagnosis. "A classic case of cardiac arrest," he declared after a brief examination. "At his age, it's not surprising. The shock of his master's death has likely been preying on his mind." It seemed a reasonable conclusion. And yet, as I stood looking down at the peaceful face of the dead man, a dreadful suspicion began to form in my mind. Jennings had been a key witness. He was the one man, besides the late lord, who knew the secret of the hidden key. And now he was silenced. Coincidence? Perhaps. But in a house so steeped in secrets, I was beginning to lose my faith in coincidence. I discreetly examined the room, but found nothing out of the ordinary. A half-empty glass of water stood on the bedside table. I noted it, but without any clear idea of its significance. The household was plunged into grief and confusion, and in the midst of it all, Lord Robert Ferrers remained an island of cold composure. His reaction to the news of his most loyal servant's death was a brief, formal expression of regret. There was no shock, no sorrow. It was the reaction of a man for whom an inconvenient problem has been solved. I telegraphed Holmes at once, using a simple code we had arranged. "Jennings dead, suspect foul play, water glass by bed, come at once." The reply came within hours. "Am on my way. Do not let them touch the glass." I returned to the valet's room, my heart pounding, to find it locked. Lord Ferrers, on the advice of Dr. Armitage, had ordered the room sealed until the undertaker could arrive in the morning. My request to enter was met with a cold and absolute refusal. "The man is dead, Doctor," said Lord Ferrers, his eyes like chips of ice. "Let him rest in peace. I will not have his final moments disturbed by morbid curiosity." I was powerless to argue. I could only wait with a growing sense of dread for the arrival of my friend. I felt a palpable sense of evil closing in around Ferrers Court, a shadow that had been cast 50 years ago and was now, at last, claiming its final victims. The science of deduction. Sherlock Holmes arrived on the first train in the morning, bringing with him a small leather case of chemical apparatus. He listened to my account of Jennings's death in grim silence, his face set like a granite mask. "A cardiac seizure, you say the doctor called it?" he asked, his voice sharp. "And you, Watson, with your medical knowledge, what did you observe?" "The symptoms were consistent with it, Holmes," I admitted. "Cyanosis, difficulty breathing, the suddenness of the attack. But it was too convenient. He was the one man who could have testified about the keys." "Precisely. Convenience is the mother of suspicion. We must get into that room, Watson, and we must get that glass." Lord Ferrers, however, proved to be an immovable obstacle. He met us in the hall, his face a thundercloud of controlled fury. "Mr. Holmes," he began, his voice dangerously low, "I believe I made it clear to my niece that this matter was closed. Your presence here is an intrusion. I must ask you to leave my house at once." Holmes was not in the least intimidated. He met the nobleman's glare with a cool, appraising stare of his own. "Lord Ferrers," he said, his tone deceptively mild, "a man has died under your roof. A man who was a loyal servant to your family for 40 years. I am here to ensure that his death was as natural as it appears. I am sure that as a man of honour you would not wish any doubt to linger upon the matter. Dr. Armitage is satisfied, I am satisfied, that is the end of it." "Is it?" Holmes retorted, and for the first time a steely edge entered his voice. "A man who knew a vital secret concerning a missing confession dies suddenly. You, who have the most to lose from that confession's discovery, show no grief, and you actively obstruct any attempt at investigation. If you persist in this refusal, Lord Ferrers, I shall have no choice but to go directly to the Chief Constable of Kent and lay my suspicions before him. The ensuing scandal, I can assure you, will be far more damaging than a discreet and private inquiry." The threat struck home. A muscle twitched in the nobleman's jaw, and a flicker of fear showed in his cold eyes. For a long moment he stared at Holmes, and then, with a gesture of disgust, he turned on his heel. "Do what you will," he snarled over his shoulder. "You will find nothing. But when you're done, I expect you to be gone." "That, my lord," Holmes murmured to his retreating back, "will depend entirely upon what we find." The room was as I had left it, cold and still. The body of the unfortunate valet had been removed, but the faint, sweetish scent of death still hung in the air. Holmes went directly to the bedside table. The glass of water was still there. He took it up with a gloved hand and examined it against the light. "There appears to be a slight, crystalline sediment at the bottom," he remarked. He decanted a small amount of the water into a test tube from his case, then added a few drops of a clear reagent. We watched, transfixed, as the liquid in the tube turned a faint but unmistakable shade of emerald green. "Good heavens, Holmes!" I cried. "Just as I suspected, Watson," he said, his face grim. "Aconitine, the distilled poison of the wolfsbane plant. A classic and devilishly subtle poison. A minute dose, administered over time, can mimic the symptoms of heart disease weakening the cardiac muscles until a final, larger dose induces a fatal seizure that is almost indistinguishable from the real thing. It is tasteless, odorless, and leaves few traces unless one knows specifically what to look for. Jennings did not die of a broken heart, Watson. He was murdered. My blood ran cold. But who? And how? The who is becoming clearer with every moment. The how is simple. A few drops in his nightly glass of water. A simple and effective method of administration. The murderer is someone with free access to this house. Someone who could enter the servants' quarters without suspicion. He now began a minute examination of the room, crawling upon the floor with his lens, scrutinizing every inch of the bare boards. At last he gave a cry of satisfaction. He had found something near the leg of the washstand, a small, dark object. He picked it up with his tweezers and held it out for me to see. It was a fragment of a cigar ash. Observe, Watson. It is a dark, flaky ash with a very distinctive composition. This is not the ash of a common cigarette or a pipe. This is from a particularly fine and expensive brand of cigar, an imported Havana. I have made a study of such things. Now, who in this house smokes such cigars? Lord Ferrers, perhaps? I suggested. Perhaps, but I think we shall find that our other suspect has a taste for the finer things in life. This is a vital clue, Watson, a physical link between the murderer and the scene of the crime. Let us now turn our attention back to the original mystery, the keys. We returned to the study, where Holmes subjected the great iron safe to another, even more intense scrutiny. He ran his fingers over its surface, peered into the keyhole, and even sniffed at the cold metal. There is no trace of oil or graphite, such as a lockpicker might use, he mused. And yet there is a faint, almost imperceptible odour, something chemical and astringent. It reminds me of... yes, of a dentist's surgery. The smell of plaster of Paris. He stood up, a look of sudden, brilliant comprehension on his face. Of course, it is so simple, I should have seen it at once. Watson, we have been fools. We have been searching for a stolen key or a duplicate key, when the truth is far more elegant. There was no second key. But Holmes, how else could the safe have been opened? With the original key, my dear fellow? Think. Lord Ferrers dies. The key is on a chain around his neck. The doctor, the uncle, and the niece are present. The uncle takes the key. Now, what is to prevent him, in the hour or two before he must place the key in a secure place, from taking a simple wax impression of it? It is the work of a moment. With that impression, a duplicate could be cast. But that is crude and leaves traces. There is a better way. With a wax impression, one can create a plaster mould. From that mould, one can create a perfect copy of the key's teeth, not in metal, but in a hard, durable material, gutta percha perhaps. It would be strong enough to turn the lock once or twice before breaking. The same process could be used for the smaller key if its location were known. But Jennings swore no one else knew of the secret drawer. Jennings swore he told no one, Holmes corrected me. That does not mean no one else discovered it. A man who is clever enough to conceive of such a crime would be clever enough to have studied the old lord's habits, to have watched him, perhaps even to have searched the study on a prior occasion. He would not need to steal the keys, only to borrow them. Or, in the case of the safe key, to have access to it for a mere 5 minutes after the old lord's death. The same is true for the smaller key. He could have taken an impression at any time and replaced it, leaving no one the wiser. And you believe this man is Lord Ferrers? I believe he is one of the conspirators. He had the opportunity to take the impression of the safe key. But the poisoning of Jennings, that feels like the work of a different mind. Colder, more patient, more precise. Lord Ferrers is a man of temper, not of subtlety. No, I suspect he is a pawn in a larger game, a frightened man being manipulated by a master. He fell silent, his eyes fixed upon the portrait of the two young men on the mantelpiece, the young Bevington Ferrers and his friend Alistair Finch. "It all comes back to them, Watson," he said softly, "to a crime committed 50 years ago, to a friendship betrayed. I must know what became of the other man at that trial, the dissolute baronet's son, Richard Croft. And I must confront the man who links the past to the present, the man whose father's firm was bought out by the ambitious clerk. Our case lies in London, Watson. We have all the data we can gather from this house of shadows. The final act of this tragedy will be played out in a solicitor's office in Lincoln's Inn Fields." The web in Lincoln's Inn Fields. Our return to London was a whirlwind of activity. Holmes dispatched a legion of his Baker Street irregulars, those keen-eyed street Arabs who constituted his unofficial police force, with instructions to shadow Mr. Abrahams and to make inquiries into the life and habits of the long-forgotten Richard Croft. Meanwhile, he himself plunged back into the labyrinthine newspaper archives of the British Museum, emerging late that evening coated in dust, but with a triumphant gleam in his eyes. "I have it, Watson!" he cried, bursting into our rooms and casting a pile of notes upon the table. "The entire sordid tapestry is laid bare. Richard Croft, after the trial, fell ever deeper into debt and dissipation. He fled to the continent to escape his creditors and died in a brawl in a Parisian tavern some 10 years later. He is a dead end. But Abrahams, Watson, Abrahams is the key." He began to pace the room in his excitement, his long, thin form casting a dancing shadow on the walls. "My agents have discovered that Mr. Abrahams is a man of impeccable reputation, but expensive tastes. He lives in a fine house in Kensington, is a collector of rare books, and smokes a particularly expensive brand of Havana cigar. One of my lads, a clever little rogue named Wiggins, managed to acquire a discarded butt from his ashtray. The ash, Watson, is identical to the fragment we found in Jennings's room." "Good heavens, Holmes! Then it was Abrahams who was in the room." "It was Abrahams who was the poisoner. He visited Ferrers Court on the day before Jennings's death. He would have had ample opportunity to enter the valet's room and administer the final fatal dose to the water glass. A man of his quiet, unassuming nature could move about the house without attracting the least attention." "But the motive, Holmes? Why would he do it? Why would he involve himself in this affair at all?" "For that we must go back to his father, the original Abrahams, the clerk who bought out the ruined practice of Alistair Finch's father. I have been investigating that ruin, Watson, and it was no mere failed investment. Finch Sr. was destroyed by a whispering campaign, by rumours of malpractice that were later proven to be baseless, but not before his clients had deserted him. And who was the principal beneficiary of his fall? The man whose legal affairs were transferred to the newly established firm of Abrahams and Son. That man was the old Lord Bevington Ferrers." He paused, letting the full weight of his words sink in. "Do you see the pattern, Watson? Finch urges his friend Ferrers to confess. Ferrers refuses. Finch's family is mysteriously ruined. Ferrers transfers his business to the man who profits from that ruin. It is a clear case of retaliation. Ferrers used his power and influence to crush the man who knew his secret. But where does the current Abrahams fit in? He is not the son of the clerk, Holmes said, his voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. That is merely the name he has assumed. Watson, I have spent the day tracing the genealogy of the man who was framed, the transported farmer, Thomas Slade. Slade had a wife and a young son. After his conviction, they vanished, sinking into the poverty and anonymity of London's East End. The wife died. The son, a clever and bitterly resentful boy, was taken in by a charity. He excelled at his studies, became a clerk, and eventually qualified as a solicitor. A man driven by a singular, all-consuming purpose: to avenge his father and destroy the family that had wronged him. The man we know as Abrahams is in fact Thomas Slade, Jr. I sprang from my chair in amazement. Incredible! It is a plot worthy of a French novel. It is a plot born of a lifetime of burning hatred, Watson. Think of the patience, the cunning. For years he has worked his way up, gaining the trust of the very man whose secret he intended to expose. He became the family's solicitor, the keeper of their secrets, all the while waiting for his moment. The death of the old lord was the signal. He knew of the confession. Perhaps the old lord, in a moment of guilt, hinted at its existence. His plan was simple and brilliant. He did not need to steal the documents himself. He needed to force Lord Robert Ferrers to do it for him. How could he do that? He would have approached Robert Ferrers, the heir, with a proposition. "Your father's confession is in that safe," he would say. "If it is found, your title is worthless, your name disgraced. But I can help you. I have discovered the location of the key to the inner box. You have access to the safe key. Together we can destroy the evidence forever." Lord Robert, a weak and proud man, terrified of scandal, would have walked straight into the trap. He made the wax impression, he opened the safe, he destroyed the documents, believing Abrahams to be his confederate. And Abrahams's goal in this? His goal was never the documents, Watson. His goal was the destruction of the Ferrers name. With the confession gone, he holds Lord Robert in the palm of his hand. He can bleed him dry through blackmail, ruin him at his leisure. He has made the son an accomplice in the cover-up of the father's crime. It is a perfect poetic revenge. Jennings had to be eliminated because he was the one person who could have contradicted Abrahams's claim to have discovered the secret of the key, thereby exposing the conspiracy. It is monstrous, Holmes. It is a masterpiece of cold-blooded, long-term villainy. But he has made one small mistake. He left a trace of his expensive cigar ash in a dead man's room. And upon that small fragment, his entire web of deceit will be unravelled. Now, Watson, fetch your service revolver. We are going to pay a late-night call on Mr. Abrahams. I have sent a wire to Lestrade of Scotland Yard to meet us there. I fancy that when our solicitor friend sees the four of us on his doorstep, he will realise that the game is up. It was past 10 o'clock when our hansom pulled up before a handsome, well-appointed house in a quiet Kensington square. A light burned in a downstairs window. As we stepped onto the pavement, a stout, bulldog-faced man emerged from the shadows. It was Inspector Lestrade. "Got your wire, Holmes?" he said gruffly. What's all this about? A respectable solicitor? You'd better be sure of your ground." "I am never more sure, Lestrade," Holmes replied calmly. "I have the hangman's rope in my pocket. All I need is the neck to put it around. Let us go in." Holmes's sharp rap on the door was answered by a surprised maidservant. Pushing past her, we made our way to the study from which the light emanated. There, seated at a large desk, surrounded by his beloved rare books, sat Mr. Abrahams. He looked up, his pale face showing a flicker of alarm that was instantly suppressed. "Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice icy, "to what do I owe this unprofessional and unwelcome intrusion?" "I have come to discuss the estate of the late Lord Ferrers," Holmes said, stepping forward into the light, "and the death of a man named Jennings, and the conviction 50 years ago of a farmer named Thomas Slade." At the mention of the last name, the solicitor's composure finally shattered. A ghastly pallor spread across his features, and he half rose from his chair, his hand trembling. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. "Oh, I think you do, Mr. Slade," Holmes said softly. "The game is over. The ash from your cigar places you in Jennings' room. My chemical tests on the water glass will show the presence of aconitine. Lord Ferrers, when faced with the gallows, will confess his part in the destruction of the documents to save his own skin. Every strand of your web has been cut." For a terrible moment, the man's face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. The quiet, respectable solicitor vanished, and in his place was the vengeful son of a wronged man. His eyes darted around the room as if seeking an escape. Then, with a sudden snake-like movement, his hand shot out to a small, ornate box on his desk. "Stand back!" he shrieked, fumbling with the latch. But Holmes was too quick for him. In 2 bounds he was across the room, his iron grip seizing the man's wrist. The box clattered to the floor, spilling its contents. Not a weapon, but a small, deadly-looking file and a tiny, loaded derringer. Lestrade and I rushed forward to secure the struggling man. As the inspector snapped the handcuffs on his wrists, all the fight went out of him. He slumped in his chair, a broken and defeated figure. "You are very clever, Mr. Holmes," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "For 30 years I have planned this. For 30 years I have lived and breathed my revenge. I had them. The proud Ferrers were in my grasp, to be crushed at my leisure. And you have ruined it all for the sake of a speck of ash." "Justice has a long memory, Mr. Slade," Holmes replied gravely. "You sought to avenge one crime by committing another, far worse. You have become the very thing you despised." He turned to Lestrade. "The case is yours, Inspector. I fancy you will find that a charge of murder and conspiracy will be more than sufficient to see him to the gallows he so richly deserves." As we left the house, leaving Lestrade to his grim duty, a sense of profound melancholy settled over me. We had solved the mystery of the Ferrers documents, but in doing so we had unearthed a tragedy that had spanned generations, a cycle of sin and vengeance that had consumed all it had touched. Back in our rooms at Baker Street, Holmes lit his pipe and stared into the fire for a long time before he spoke. "A sad business, Watson," he said at last. "It shows how a single act of weakness and cowardice can send ripples of misery down through the years. The old lord lived his life with a guilty secret. His proud uncle will now live with disgrace, and Slade has thrown away his life in the pursuit of a bitter revenge. Only young Miss Ferrers emerges with any credit. "And what will become of her and the estate?" I asked. "Lord Robert, in return for his testimony, will likely escape the most serious charges, but the scandal will be immense. The name of Ferrers will be forever tainted. I suspect he will sell the estate and live abroad. Miss Ferrers and her brother will have their inheritance, but it will be a hollow victory. They have lost the one thing their grandfather valued most, the family honour he himself had secretly betrayed. It is a sombre lesson, my dear fellow, on the enduring truth that the sins of the fathers are indeed visited upon the children."